She came to the ranch with nothing, but changed every life there. The morning Eleanor Voss arrived at the Calloway spread, the sky was the color of old pewter, low and pressing, the kind of sky that made the land feel smaller than it was. A cold front had been moving down from the northern territories for 2 days, and the prairie grass bent low in long silver waves, like something trying to lie down and rest. Nobody was expecting her. Nobody even knew her name yet. Gideon Calloway was in the far pasture mending a stretch of fence line when his youngest, a boy of 8 named Reuben, came running through the tall grass with his coat flapping open and his boots caked with red clay. The boy had a habit of running everywhere, as though stillness itself was something to be suspicious of. "Papa, there's a woman at the gate. She's got nothing with her, just herself." Gideon drove the last staple into the post, straightened his back slowly, and looked toward the house. He was 41 years old and carried his age in the way men do when life has asked more of them than they expected to give. His hands were rough from years of wire and wood and weather, and there was a stillness about him that some people mistook for coldness, though it was something else entirely. It was the quiet of a man who had learned to measure his words because he had run out of easy ones. He walked back to the main gate, Reuben half skipping beside him. She was standing just outside the fence, holding herself very straight, the way people do when they are trying not to show how tired they are. She wore a dark wool coat that had seen better winters, and her boots were cracked along the sides, the leather dried out and separating at the sole of the right foot. She carried no bag, no trunk, no bundle tied in cloth, just herself, as Reuben had said. Her hair was dark and pinned back, and her face, though composed, had the look of someone who had been walking for longer than was reasonable. "I heard you might be needing help," she said. Her voice was steady. "With the house, the cooking, the children, I was told in town." Gideon looked at her for a moment. "Harlan at the feed store told you that." "A woman at the dry goods. I didn't catch her name." He studied her face. It was not unkind, his studying. He was simply trying to understand what he was looking at, the way you look at weather coming in from the west and try to determine whether it will pass or settle. "You got people in town?" he asked. "No," she said, and there was no hesitation in it, no bitterness either, just the plain fact of it, offered without apology. His daughter Nora appeared at the porch, 12 years old and serious in the way of children who have had to become serious early. She stood with her arms crossed, watching. "Come in out of the cold," Gideon said finally. "We'll talk." Her name was Eleanor Voss, and she was 34 years old, though she looked younger in certain light and older in others. She had come from Ohio originally, then Kansas, then a small settlement east of Dodge that had dried up and scattered its people like seeds on wind. She did not offer more than that, and Gideon did not ask. There was an unspoken understanding on the frontier about not pressing people for their histories. Everyone had come from somewhere they were trying not to return to. That was, in many ways, what the frontier was. She took the small room off the back of the kitchen, which had been used for storage. She cleared it herself, stacked the old crates and seed bags in the barn, swept the floor down to bare wood, and made up the narrow bed with the spare quilt Nora brought without being asked. She did not complain about the room's size or the cold that came through the gap beneath the door. She simply plugged the gap with a rolled strip of cloth and set a candle on the windowsill. That first week she was quiet. She rose before dawn and had the stove burning and coffee on before Gideon came in from the first morning check of the animals. She cooked without fuss, plain meals that filled the stomach, biscuits and salt pork and corn mush, a potato soup thick enough to stand a spoon in. She washed the dishes, swept the floors, mended the curtains in the main room that had been fraying at the corners for 2 seasons. Nora watched her constantly, with the careful attention of a child who has learned that strangers sometimes leave without warning. Reuben simply talked at her the way he talked at everyone, a steady stream of observation and question that Eleanor answered patiently and without condescension, treating each of his wonderings as worthy of a real answer. "Why do horses sleep standing up?" he asked one morning while she was rolling biscuit dough. "Because they're prey animals," she said. "Standing up means they can run faster if something startles them." Reuben considered this with great seriousness. "Are we prey animals?" Not anymore, she said. We had to be once, but we figured out walls and fire. He seemed satisfied with this and went back to his breakfast. Gideon heard the exchange from the doorway where he had stopped to pull on his work gloves. He said nothing, but something in him eased just slightly, the way a tight knot begins to give when warmth is applied slowly enough. By the second week, the temperature had dropped in earnest. The first real snow came not as a gentle dusting, but as a hard, grinding storm that moved in from the northwest and did not relent for 3 days. Gideon spent those days moving between the house and the barn, keeping the animals calm and fed, breaking ice on the water troughs twice daily, carrying extra hay to the cattle huddled at the windbreak fence. Eleanor kept the house. She kept the stove burning, kept the children fed and occupied, read to them from the one novel the house contained until she had read it twice through. When the wind was at its worst, howling under the eaves and rattling the shutters, she taught Nora a card game she said she had learned as a girl, and Reuben fell asleep against her arm without either of them noticing when it happened. Gideon came in late on the second night of the storm, frozen through, ice on his beard, his hands clumsy and slow. She had kept a pot of soup hot on the back of the stove. She handed him a bowl without ceremony and sat across the table while he ate, not talking, not filling the silence with anything unnecessary. When he finished, she refilled the bowl without asking. "The old mare," he said after a while, "she's not going to make it to spring." "Is she suffering?" "Not yet, but she's old. She's earned the right to go quiet." Eleanor looked at her hands for a moment. "My father had a horse like that. He sat with her all night when her time came, didn't want her to be alone." Gideon looked up. It was the first personal thing she had offered, and he felt the weight of it. The way you feel the weight of a door opening into a room you didn't know was there. "Your father a rancher?" he asked. "Farmer," she said. "Small place, hard soil. He worked it his whole life and left it to debts." She said it plainly. "That's the way it goes sometimes." "Yes," he said, "it is." The storm broke on the third morning, and the world outside was white and absolute, the fences barely visible above the drifts, the sky a clean, cold blue that ached to look at. The children pressed their faces to the window glass and left breath-fog circles there, and Reuben wanted to go outside immediately, and Alina helped him into his coat and hat and watched from the doorway as he launched himself into the snow with a sound that was pure and uncomplicated. Nora stayed inside longer. She had been watching Alina more carefully lately, not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to consideration. "Did you ever have children?" Nora asked one afternoon, direct in the way she always was. Alina was mending a shirt at the table. She kept her eyes on her stitching for a moment before answering. "No," she said. "Did you want them?" "Nora," Gideon's voice came from the other room, a quiet warning. "It's all right," Alina said. She looked at Nora steadily. "I thought I might have them one day, but some doors close before you reach them." Nora was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, Mama's door closed. She didn't want it to. "No," Alina said softly. "I don't imagine she did." They sat together in the quiet for a while after that, the fire crackling, the wind low outside. Something had been named between them, not resolved, but named. And sometimes naming is enough. Gideon's wife had been dead for 3 years. Her name had been Clara, and her absence lived in the house the way absences do when they're unspoken, in the particular way a room feels emptier than its dimensions should allow, in the chair no one sits in the corner of the kitchen where her herb bundles had hung and now nothing did. The children had adjusted in the way children do, finding new shapes for their days, but the grief was still there beneath the surface of things, steady as groundwater. Alina did not try to replace Clara. She seemed to understand, instinctively, that this was not her place and not what was needed. She simply occupied her own space with quiet competence and let the household find its own rhythm around her presence. She fixed the pump handle one afternoon with a piece of wire and a steady patience that surprised Gideon when he came in and found it done. She planted 3 windowsill jars of herbs from seeds she had brought wrapped in a square of cloth inside her coat pocket, the only things she had carried with her. Sage, thyme, and something she called prairie mint that she said grew back home along creek banks. Reuben watered them solemnly every morning, assigned the task without complaint. One evening in late January, Gideon found Eleanor standing at the edge of the porch in the dark, not cold-looking, just still, watching the sky. The stars out here were extraordinary on clear nights, thick as spilled grain across a black floor. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said, "just thinking." He stood beside her without intention of going back inside just yet. The cold was dry and clean. The horses were quiet in the barn. "You're good with them," he said after a while. "The children." She was quiet a moment. "They make it easy." Reuben asks everything out loud. Nora asks everything with her eyes. A pause. "You have good children, Mr. Calloway." "Gideon," he said. He had told her once before, but it felt important to say again. She looked at him sideways. In the starlight, her face was serious and calm. "Gideon," she said, as though trying the word out to see how it fit. He looked back at the sky. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that takes time to build, the kind you only arrive at when enough small truths have been traded back and forth that the space between words becomes safe. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Before Harlan's wife or whoever it was sent you out here?" She considered the question honestly. "I wasn't headed anywhere particular, I was just moving." She paused. "There's a version of that which is brave, and a version that's just scared. I was more the second kind." He nodded slowly. "I know something about that," he said. She looked at him again, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, something quieter than a smile. February brought another storm, smaller but meaner, the kind that drove sleet sideways and made the cattle restless. One of the younger steers broke through a fence panel, and Gideon spent a brutal afternoon tracking it through the drifts before bringing it back. He came in with a gash on his forearm from the wire, not deep but ragged, bleeding into his sleeve. Eleanor cleaned and dressed it at the kitchen table while Reuben watched with wide eyes and Nora tried to look unconcerned and failed. Eleanor's hands were steady and careful, her touch efficient without being impersonal. She didn't wince at the sight of it, and she didn't talk too much. She simply did what needed doing. "It won't need stitches," she said, "but you'll keep it clean." "Yes, ma'am," he said, which made her look at him with something that was definitely humor. "Don't call me ma'am, I'm not your eldest." "No," he said, "you're not." They looked at each other for just a moment too long to be completely casual, and then she tied off the bandage, and he thanked her, and that was that. But the moment sat in the room after it happened, present and quiet, the way a note hangs in the air after the instrument is set down. The old mare died on a Thursday in early March, in the night, without distress. Gideon found her in the morning, already gone, peaceful in the straw. He stood in the barn for a long time before coming in. Eleanor had the coffee poured before he said anything. She put her hand on his arm for a moment, briefly, and then moved back to the stove. "She was good," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said, "you could tell. I'll bury her on the south side of the pasture, where she liked to stand in the afternoon." "That's right," Eleanor said. "That's exactly right." Spring came the way it always does on the prairie, tentatively, in small gestures, a strip of mud at the fence line, crocuses appearing in defiance of logic along the porch boards, the return of meadowlarks in the lower field. The light changed. The air changed. Reuben spent every moment he was allowed outside, and Eleanor watched him from the kitchen window with an expression that was warm and private, the expression of someone allowing themselves to feel something they had long kept carefully folded up. Nora helped her plant the kitchen garden one Saturday morning, both of them kneeling in the turned-over earth. Nora asking careful questions about which seeds went how deep, writing nothing down but remembering everything. At some point during this work, Nora said without looking up, "I'm glad you came." Eleanor kept her hands in the soil for a moment before responding. "So am I," she said, and meant it completely. That evening, Gideon found her at the fence at the edge of the south pasture, watching the sun go down behind the distant line of hills. He walked out to stand beside her. The sky was enormous and orange and slowly purpling at the edges. The meadowlarks were calling in the lower field. He said, "I've been thinking." She waited. I don't want you to leave, he said. Not when you've got somewhere else to be, not at all, if I'm being honest. She was quiet for a long moment. The last of the orange faded at the horizon, leaving a deep, clear blue. I don't have anywhere else to be, she said. I told you that when I came. I know what you told me, he said. I'm asking something different. She looked at him then, full and direct, and he held her gaze without flinching, which cost him something, though it was the right kind of cost. All right, she said quietly, not as a surrender, as a choice, as the deliberate opening of a door she had kept shut for a long time turned on its hinges finally toward warmth. The prairie wind moved through the pasture grass, and somewhere in the barn the horses shifted and settled, and inside the house Reuben was already calling for supper, and Nora was telling him to be patient in the tone she had that was exactly like her father's. And all of it, the wind and the horses and the children's voices and the last of the fading light, felt like something pieced back together from fragments, not perfect. Nothing is perfect on the frontier, but whole in the way that matters, held together by work and honesty and the quiet courage it takes to stay. She had come with nothing, just herself and 3 seeds wrapped in a square of cloth, and the particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself but simply continues. And in continuing, in showing up and staying and being present through the cold and the grief and the long, slow thaw, she had given them something none of them had known they were missing until they had it. Spring deepened around the Calloway ranch, unhurried and abundant. The herbs in the windowsill jars grew toward the glass. The garden took hold in the dark-turned earth. And every morning the coffee was on before first light, and every evening there was a lamp burning in the window, and that was not a small thing. On the frontier, it was never a small thing. A light in the window means someone is waiting, someone is home. And home, as Eleanor Voss had come to understand after a long time of not having one, is not a place you find. It is a place you make slowly, with careful hands, in whatever ground will hold you.